Well, hey guys, it's been a while since we've had a video lecture, and I'm pretty sure you're really enthused about listening to another video lecture. But this one is going to be pretty important because we're going to go over slave laws, and slave laws is not in chapter 13, which is where we are heading next. That's the North and the South. So you will definitely want to pay close attention, take good notes on this section. Before we get started, you want your North and South note packet out. Obviously, put your name on the front page. There's a couple of changes that I want you to make to the note packet before we get rolling here. On page 2, I want you to add a concept or a vocab term in here. Could you please add Underground Railroad? Again, add Underground Railroad and define it on page 2. So you can make that number 17 if you would like. And another big change, if you will flip to page 3, you'll be happy to know that on the left-hand side, you can just go ahead and make a big X on the left-hand side there. This is really going to be a repeat of the era of good feelings and this conversation about sectionalism, nationalism, Calhoun, Webster, and Clay. Now we will talk about these guys again, but we're going to talk about them in a different light. So what we're going to do in this video lecture is we're going to finish the right-hand side of 3, and then we're going to finish off page 4. And then after that, I'll have another lecture on just the South. So the South in chapter 13 is at the end, but I'm going to start with it first and then go into the North so that we can fit it closer to our field trip on Friday. All right, so again, this section or video lecture is going to be over the slave laws. And we're going to take a look at the laws that were put into place or compromises that were put into place that kept slavery alive from 1787 when we wrote our new Constitution to the point where we break as a country in 1861 with the American Civil War. So to tread back just a little bit, I have some whiteboards to demonstrate my review concepts. Remember in 1787, we had the Constitutional Convention at Philadelphia. We learned that the Articles of Confederation is too weak and it's going to fail, so they decided to rewrite a new Constitution. Now, there was a topic or an issue that could have made the Constitutional Convention fail altogether. And this was on how to count slaves in the issue of taxation and representation. Now, the South, had they had their way, in a scenario where you have 5 slaves, they would obviously want to count all 5 slaves for representation because that would give them more power in the Senate. However, the North felt that wasn't fair because they treated the slaves as property and should have to pay taxes on all 5. So the South was really close to leaving the table at the Constitutional Convention, and perhaps the convention falls apart, the Constitution fails to be written, and the Republic falls really just after a few short years after the American Revolution. So the Three-Fifths Compromise, dealing with slavery. Slavery is an evil thing. However, if we were to maybe take a look at a couple things that, couple highlights or things that we could look at in a positive light from the Three-Fifths Compromise, was that number one, it does keep the Republic together. It keeps the South sitting at the table, finish the Constitution, and the Republic is saved. Secondly, though slavery is evil, and I'm not a big fan of the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise does cut the power of the South a little bit. So instead of counting all 5 of their slaves for representation in Congress, they could only count 3. So this is going to cut back their power. So, it would have been nice to end slavery, but the South would have totally left and the Republic falls apart. So this Three-Fifths Compromise does take a little bit of power away from the South. All right. So that's a little bit of review where we're at when we get really up to 1819. So let's take a look at what's going to happen in 1819. Now, we've already studied the Missouri Compromise, and we went over how the compromise was put together. And if you remember, the concern was all about balance. How many representatives are going to be in for the free slave, or for the free states and the slave states? By 1819, we have 11 free states and 11 slave states. So multiply that by 2 senators on each side. You have 22 senators versus 22 senators in 1819. Everything is equal. Everything is status quo from there. However, if a state was to be added, we're going to have this controversy again about uneven power in the Senate. Now, from our previous studies, we learned that the next state that's going to have, or next territory that's going to have enough people to apply for statehood is Missouri. However, in Missouri, in their territorial constitution, they had allowed for slavery. So if they were to become a state and stay with that constitution, Missouri would be a slave state. Now, that's going to add 2 more senators to the slave side. So then you would have 24 slave, 22 free. And again, this is going to upset the balance. So this is going to cause a problem. So HenryClay is going to masterfully put together a compromise that's going to keep the republic alive for the next 25 to 30 years. So HenryClay in 1820 said, well, how about we do this? Let Missouri come in as a slave state, and at the same time bring in Maine as a free state, because they were really close to applying for statehood also. That way, we have 24 senators for the free, 24 senators for the slave states, or for North and South. And then Clay looked a little bit ahead and said, well, what do we do in territories out in the West as they apply for statehood? The answer was the 36 degrees north parallel right here, which really runs along the southern border of Missouri right here. So in the compromise, any territory north of this line, when applying to be a state in the United States of America, this would be free. They would be a free state. Anything south then, any territory in the south would then be slave. For example, if Arkansas territory wanted to come in, they would come in and enter the side of the South, or the slavery states. Don't forget to mark this on your map, 36 degrees north. I know a lot of you on your other maps just skip right by it, but this is very, very important. Know this. All right, so here I have a picture of the flag, what it looks like in 1820 with the admission of Missouri and Maine. So like I said before, Missouri Compromise, maybe not the most ideal thing. It does not end slavery, but it does bring peace between the North and the South for 25 years. But this is going to be temporary until we come to the American-Mexican War. Now, in the American-Mexican War, which we learned about in the Manifest Destiny unit, we go to war, whether it be by trickery or by Mexican aggression. Either way, we went to war. We do win, and we gain quite a bit of land. Actually, Mexico is going to lose about half of its territory, is what we learn. So, if things go our way in the war, and they do, we stand to gain a lot of land. Now, people in Congress understood this. Let's say that we win. How are we going to take care of this issue of the balance between free and slave states as we add more and more states from these territories that we win? David Wilmot of Pennsylvania drafted a bill that said, if and when we win and we might gain territory, we should outlaw any slavery in the land obtained from the war with Mexico. Of course, the South is going to be furious with this. The South was hoping that they could make the New Mexico Territory and the California Territory states that have slavery. And of course, this would increase their power in Congress immensely. If you remember John Calhoun from South Carolina, who was a states' rights guy, he was Andrew Jackson's vice president, he's going to come onto the scene again and fight for state rights and say, the national government cannot interfere with state business, and slavery happens to be state business because slavery was decided in the state constitution. Now, whether you disagree with slavery, Calhoun does bring a point here to at least think about. Now, the Wilmot Proviso, this bill, does pass in the House of Representatives because by population the North had more House of Representatives. So they agree to this plan, the Wilmot Proviso. However, when it gets into the Senate where the power is equal, then this bill is going to stalemate and ultimately die. I want to go ahead and take a look at an important election. It was an election of 1848. Sorry if I have some stuff kind of rubbed off here. But in the presidential election of 1848, there's going to be two candidates. One for the Whig Party. They put up General Zachary Taylor, the hero from the American-Mexican War. They're going to put him up as their candidate for president. And then the Democrats are going to put up Senator Lewis Cass from Michigan as their candidate for president. Now, in this campaign, with people really getting pretty emotional and upset about this issue of slavery, where it's going to go, how is it going to spread, or how is it going to be stopped, in this election, both parties fail to even mention or make a stand on slavery during their campaign. And this is going to frustrate a lot of people. So out of this frustration, there is a new third political party that is formed, and that was the Free Soil Party. The Free Soil Party then, though short-lived, they built their whole platform on this slogan: free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. Fast forward to 1849. Remember in 1849, again in our Manifest Destiny unit, we had the gold rush, which brought hundreds and thousands of people to California. So obviously they're going to have enough people to apply for statehood. California from about 1848 to 1850, they were their own republic. They were called the Bear Flag Republic. And in their constitution, they outlawed slavery. So if California does end up coming into the Union, they would obviously be a free state. So again, the South is going to say, no, hold on, we don't want that. Because it's going to upset the balance. So it looks like we're going to have to maybe come up with another compromise. And who do you think the guy is to help us with this compromise? Remember? Yeah, you got it. HenryClay. HenryClay, again, is going to come to the rescue and save the Republic by offering the Compromise of 1850. In the Compromise of 1850, there are four major provisions that you have to complete in your note packet on page 4. You can take a look at this as, what does the North get out of this compromise? What does the North get? Number one, California will enter as a free state. And secondly, the North is going to get their way in that the slave trade is going to be abolished or canceled in Washington, D.C. Many Northerners had a fit about Washington, D.C., which is supposed to be the capital of the free world, a symbol of liberty, but yet just blocks away from the Capitol building, we were trading, selling, auctioning off human beings. And the North thought that that was a huge contradiction that could not keep going. So this is what the North gets. Now what about on the South end of things in the compromise? Number 3, this again will be for the North. Congress will agree not to pass any laws about banning slavery in the areas that were going to be received in the Mexican War. So it was going to still be kind of left open of what's going to happen with New Mexico territory and so on. And number 4, if the South gave up their slave trade in Washington, D.C., they wanted a little bit back to help them keep their institution of slavery. And what they wanted was they wanted to pass tougher Fugitive Slave Acts. So laws that if a slave would run away from the plantation and go in the north, that the southern slave hunters had the right to go up north and recapture these fugitive slaves. So let's take a look at what the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 looks like. Now, this has to pass along with the Compromise of 1850 for this deal to get done. Number 1, all citizens must help catch or expose runaway slaves. All citizens of the United States of America, whether you're in the South or whether you're in the North. Now, the problem with that is that the Northerners they're basically going to be forced to obey a law that they feel is immoral. It goes against their conscience. And if you're caught aiding a fugitive, you would have to pay a heavy fine or even be imprisoned. Now, the Fugitive Slave Act is also going to affect blacks, both in the South and in the North. For in the South, a fugitive slave, it's going to be much harder. Let's say the fugitive slave does escape to freedom in the North, but with this law, it gives the power of the slave hunter to go into the North and recapture this property. Now, in the North, the blacks are going to be more fearful because of kidnapping. All a slave hunter would have to do is go in the North and say that this particular black person was a slave, and it was their word against their word, and unfortunately, the slave hunter is going to win most of the time on that. And so this is going to make Northern blacks fearful for their lives and being kidnapped. And we're going to take a look at one gentleman who was a free black man in the North, and he was kidnapped and sold into slavery. A really neat story. All right, so the Compromise of 1850, again, we'll see that California is admitted as a free state. We're going to obviously have the slave trade knocked out of Washington, D.C., but the South has power to come up into the North and recapture any fugitive slaves, and the North has to abide by these laws even though it might be against their conscience. I just want to show you this map here to show you what, in 1860, what the concentration of slavery is going to look like. The dark areas is going to be high concentration of slavery, all the way up to yellow, which is little to no slavery at all. And if you really study this map and you take a look at the really dark areas, you're going to find it here in Virginia, basically all of South Carolina and the Atlantic coast here along Georgia and South Carolina is going to have a heavy slave population. And over here in Texas, and also if you take a look along the Missouri River, the Mississippi River in the South, you're going to have high concentration of slavery. All right, again, this is just another map here to give a summary of the Compromise of 1850. Daniel Webster, senator from Massachusetts, we've talked about him already. He was a nationalist. He supported the Compromise of 1850 and got most Northerners on board to help pass this. Now, his opposite would be John Calhoun, who was from the South and was all about states' rights and said that the Compromise was illegal because it messed with the Constitution of the states. And Henry Clay, in this whole plan, he's of course the one who developed the Compromise of 1850, but he's going to get the Westerners to either abstain from voting or to vote for the Compromise of 1850. Now, Stephen Douglas, even though Henry Clay crafted the Compromise of 1850, Stephen Douglas from Illinois was in charge of figuring out a way to manipulate it and get it passed through Congress in any way that he could. So what he actually did was took this plan and broke it down into 5 little bills and passed these bills separately through Congress so that we can make the total compromise here. So in the Compromise of 1850, at first it looked like it was going to fail because President Zachary Taylor had opposed the Compromise of 1850 and was really going to push for it to be killed in Congress. However, an ironic twist of fate, Zachary Taylor unexpectedly dies, and Millard Fillmore is going to become the president. And Fillmore, who was for the Compromise of 1850, then is going to encourage a lot of the Whigs to simply abstain or not vote on the compromise, and this allows the compromise to be passed and let it go through. And Fillmore, after the compromise was passed, had said, he quotes, "Finally, we have a permanent solution to the slavery problem." Really? 1850, what do we know happens just 11 years later? 1861, we have the bombing of Fort Sumter, and hence the Civil War breaks out, and it is still to this date the bloodiest and most costliest war for Americans in our history. So Fillmore was wrong. It was not a permanent solution. Rather, it was just a Band-Aid for the next decade. So that's going to end slave laws, and our next lecture over the South, we'll come back and address that. See ya.